The Pain of Duality. Written by Resident Sunshine. Read to you by Evie is Evil. Chapter 7. Author's Notes. Friendly reminder that I do not have DID, so if I grossly misinterpret something, please let me know. Also, friendly reminder that Robin is an age-sliding interject. They are based around the previous Robins, mostly as a base, but have adapted as they got older to channel more Tim as Robin, versus Dick and Jason's Robins. Because of this, when they are younger, they tend to behave more like the previous Robins. Older, more like Tim. Now, onto the chapter. By the time morning came, and his phone alarm was echoing in the hollow room, Tim was already exhausted. He hardly slept under the crushing weight of his mind, and, in turn, he was left running on nothing. But it was fine. Not the first time. He glanced at his phone as his alarm went off again. Had it been 10 minutes already? Maybe he managed to fall back asleep. He hit snooze again, just in case, and pushed himself up, giving himself a moment for the room to come back into focus. Food should help. Caffeine should help. He had done far more on far less sleep. Besides, today was Stark Industries Day. He couldn't afford to miss yet another major contender for getting home. Sure, they offered regular tours, but the school offered far more in-depth knowledge than the basic tourist trap tour did. His alarm went off again. There was no way it had been another 10 minutes, right? "Come on, Tim, get it together," he groaned as he pressed his palms into his eyes. He just had to get up, get moving, anything. He hit snooze again and forced his way into the bathroom so he could splash water on his face, and hopefully push back some of that fuzziness that seemed to surround him. He was being weak. He was being exhausting. No wonder everyone else was pulling away recently. Face in sink, he tried splashing it again, before roughly running it over with a towel. He couldn't dispel the fuzziness, the way he felt like he was drifting, carried by gentle waves, but at least it made him feel a bit cleaner. He went to pull off the stolen hoodie, tossing it to the side before glancing back at it. It felt lonely without the warm, soft fabric. Before he even realized what was happening, he had pulled it back over his head, messing up his short hair and making it stick up oddly with static. He went to lift it again, frustration bubbling up. "No!" The voice in his head sounded oddly small, pained. "No? God, Tim, you're losing it." Tim grumbled, but relented, leaving the large hoodie on. He at least wore nicer clothes on the rest of his body. Maybe he could make up something, an explanation for why he was dressed so casually while trying to sneak into a laboratory. After all, he already ruined one opportunity. He couldn't afford to make the same mistake. Jason couldn't afford for him to make the same mistake. His alarm went off again, and Tim groaned, because that meant he was staring at his reflection, and trapped in his head way more than the 1 or 2 minutes he thought it was. With one last sigh, Tim pulled back on his bag and grabbed his board, this time leaving the camera behind. He could use his phone's camera if he needed to, but with how drifty he was, he didn't want to risk it getting stolen. Not when he was only half paying attention. Not when everything felt so far away. Tim took one last moment, burrowing his face into the hoodie and letting the warmth radiate around him. Just a moment to let the smells ground him. It was an odd mix of cigar and something he couldn't quite place. Mexican, maybe? It didn't really matter. The cigar smell was strong, helped pull his mind back. Whoever it belonged to must have been a heavy smoker. Oddly, it made him feel more protected, safe in a way despite having no idea why, which was absolutely insane given the fact that it was stolen from someone who more than likely took advantage of him, which saw a teen, most likely dissociated, and decided he could throw a few bucks at him and make it better. Nausea bubbled and boiled, bile burning his throat, but he swallowed it back. He didn't need to think about that right now. Right now, he just needed to make it to Stark Industries, before the school did. Go slip in so we could find their tech. Maybe hack into their systems. The ride to the tall building was thankfully uneventful, though a bit longer than he anticipated. Tim barely made it to slip in with the class, only to come face to face with a line. The students were all given cards to scan that took a photo and a thumbprint, which they immediately had to scan after going through the metal detector. It made his anxiety spike, riskier than the other buildings, but he couldn't afford to turn back. Jason couldn't afford for him to fail. Bruce couldn't afford for him to fail. His family didn't need him, but they needed Jason. They needed their glue. Then Tim could go back to his parents' old house and be a ghost, because they wouldn't need him once Jason was back. He scanned in and waited off to the side, hand gripping at his bag as he tried to focus on a slow breath in and out. He needed to stay calm. "Hey, Tim!" Peter popped up next to Tim, Ned and MJ following closely behind him. Tim stared at them for a moment, eyes flicking up to the other two. He swallowed down the anxiety, because how did this student know his name? He didn't remember telling him, did not remember having any sort of in-depth conversation. Did they try looking into him? It would make sense, but his paper trail was solid, and his false alibi was foolproof. He wasn't one to brag or gloat, but he was good when it came to hacking and coding, even without his usual tools. "So, are you excited for Stark Industries?" Peter pushed, oblivious to the spiral he was interrupting. "I plan on working here one day myself. I already interned with Mr. Stark, so..." "Dude, you're basically his kid with how often you're with him. He picks you up from school? Of course you're going to work here." Ned shook his head in exasperation. "Shut up!" Peter ducked away, face lighting up like a sunset, tinged with color beneath his dusting of freckles. "Wow, Tim, no, head in the game." He shook his head, dispelling any distracting thoughts with a spark of confusion for where they were coming from. "I suppose, out of all the ones we have toured, either Stark Industries or Baxter Foundation are probably going to be the most helpful." "Helpful for what exactly?" MJ piped up, eyes studying Tim. Job applications? I want to work in coding and design, so Oscorp isn't really a good match, and same for the others." Tim glanced back at the group, watching it thin out as they slowly made their way through the doors and past a metal detector. He watched it slowly blur and bleed, eyes unfocusing as he tuned out the friendly banter of the other teens, a dull roll in the background. "Tim, you all right there?" What was he doing again? Oh, right, Stark Labs. He needed to slip in and get to the labs, figure out if they could help, whether willing or not. He stepped into the larger crowd, missing the concerned looks shared behind him. "How are your hands and knees doing?" Tim moved through the crowd, trying to blend into the blur they had become. His hands and knees were fine, so surely they were talking to someone else. He pushed in front of a taller jock-looking teen and scanned his fingers as directed. He was sure they yelled at him, but he had a mission, and not time to worry about all these sorts of small things. He wasn't expecting to come face to face with a room of mirrors. The shock was almost enough to jar him out of the dull numbness that was building and building, right alongside the stiffness that pulled at his joints. Did he do his stretches this morning? Or was that yesterday? Everything was a bit foggy, like watching through an old and aged film camera. Someone shoved Tim harshly, making him stumble into one of the warped mirrors. Because that wasn't him, was it? Maybe he was just losing his mind. He tried shaking his head to dispel some of the odd wrongness, but it just made it throb in protest. He stared at the reflection. Wrong, only stumbling forward as another student came in and accidentally bumped into him before heading into the room. The room, which was full of mirrors, but played out like a maze, a puzzle to be solved. They were good at that. They could solve a puzzle. They narrowed their eyes and forced them away from the warping reflections, quickly analyzing where the other students had gone, what paths were tried and failed. One foot in front of the other, they quickly made their way out of the maze, trying to ignore the too wrong reflection that leered over them. They really enjoyed solving things, piecing together small bits of knowledge to better understand the world. This puzzle wasn't anything like what they normally did. It didn't lead to a new dad, a new family, did not lead to flying off of buildings and flipping through the air, didn't lead to that magical feeling of being wanted, needed, helpful. But it was still a fun little test of the brain. They didn't even take a wrong turn, which was honestly amazing given how disorienting the maze itself was. It was an odd choice to include in a building like this. Not a carnival. Just lost students and no criminals. No clown-painted faces. Much more fun than the maze and puzzle they had to go through on their 16th birthday. But they weren't 16 yet, were they? Maybe they were. Oh, shoot. They looked around, before the world spun lightly with a blur. Okay, they had to take stock. What happens? Their hands and knees hurt. Nothing new. They knew the bandages were still there, still clean. What else? Their head was throbbing. Nothing new. Between caffeine dependency and how often they had been switching lately, something had to be missing. They felt stiff and cold, but they were inside, and the AC was probably on, so then what? They looked around, trying to find a clue, a hint, anything, and, oh boy, holy exo technology, Batman! Robin rushed over to one of the displays, shifting around to get a good look at it from every angle before pulling out their notebook and starting to write down what they noticed, including small little sketches of pieces before they remembered the mission. They needed to focus on the mission at hand, not the cool display pieces. Needed to find the lab, gain access, and infiltrate. Maybe later they could loop back around to actually look at some of the things. They turned back towards the group, and almost immediately ran into a rather frazzled-looking older guy, with glasses and a god-awful goatee, who breathed out an apology to the group as a whole, before booking it out. He looked familiar. Maybe a worker? Something about a family emergency. They got pulled back, as a lady who was also rather familiar. They didn't want to think about her too much, though, because it made something close to disgust rear up. They already were feeling pretty young, so they didn't want to risk pulling in JJ, or God forbid, Timmy. Neither would be very good at the mission. She stood in front of the students, congratulating them on their times, before posting the top 5 on a hologram? And informed the students that she would take the fastest on a special tour, while the others went with the other staff members. Robin bounced on his toes slightly as they scanned the list, unsure if they wanted to be on it or not, because special tour meant they could hear more and see more. However, it also meant it would be a lot harder to slip away. Their eyes flicked over the list and relaxed as their name was not reflected. Or Tim's wasn't. Instead, it was a Peter Parker, Michelle Jones, Edward Leeds, Eugene Thompson, and Harold Osborne, which they were pretty sure was that core group that kept bothering them, so probably for the best. Though they were a little disappointed that they did not receive that recognition, that praise, a job well done. They missed Duke and the easy way he could identify them, how their pseudo-brother was the only one to ever truly call them by name, even if sometimes it took them time to even figure out it was them fronting. Missed actually being referred to, not having to hide away and pretend. Robin needed to focus. He could see Duke again soon. For now, he really needed to focus on getting back to an older mindset, figuring out what triggered them to not only front, but front younger, and figure out a way to get into the database here. The tour itself was okay. The lady, Miss Pepper Potts, was nice, and answered every question that came up from the array of students. Because they stayed as a big group, it was only so long before they were able to slip off, disappearing into the group with a cautious eye, before slipping off completely, one foot in front of the other, chin held high, like they belonged there, like they knew where they were going, even as everything was starting to feel fake around them, like a film slowly wrapping around them. They hated this, but they could hold it together. Had to force back everyone else and ignore the throbbing headache and the stiff joints, ignoring how it felt like they were breathing underwater. Once home, they could have Alfie look them over, curl up with their favorite yellow blanket, with a great book and a warm cup of tea. Forget all of this, but first, the mission. Robin let their eyes flicker around. No one was there. Alone, alone, alone. They tried to push down the acidic pain of perpetual loneliness, and got to work, focusing on the task, and not the fact that he was starting to lose ground, starting to slip based on the sudden wave of emotions. They pulled out Tim's phone and plugged it into the device attached to the door, before starting to run his program, trying to see if they could get in. It didn't take long before they hit a firewall, and once they got around that one, another one popped up. They ran another round, anxiety creeping as they glanced around again, before peeking into the lab through the window, their head throbbing. "Sorry, boss has not given you permission, and he is preoccupied at the time to ask for it, though I do commend your attempts." Robin looked around again, a frown pulling on their face. "Who? Wait, shit." They huffed and unplugged the phone, realizing that they may have been caught. It would be hard to talk their way out, but not impossible. Besides, they got enough to pull it up on a computer later, to figure out the system and try and add some permissions in. "I assure you, not any threat. Just boss's personal AI, designed to aid and assist the residents. If you are in need of medical assistance, I can direct you there, or perhaps contact someone to come assist." An AI? That made sense. Evidently quite the advanced one, given that it seemed more like a person talking through a comm than anything else. "I'm fine. Don't contact anyone. I was just curious as to what, Mr. Tony Stark was up to. I had a few questions for him, and he ditched the tour group." "So you thought it best to break into a highly secured lab to harass the boss?" Damn, when the AI put it like that. "That's what I thought. Now, I suggest you go back to the tour group before I have to involve authorities." Damn, who made the AI so sassy? Or maybe it was just them putting emotion into it. Sorry, I'm going back." Robin was starting to have a hard time focusing, which was dangerous in the field. Could get them hurt, get their friends hurt. They needed to focus, get back to the group, and slip out with the information they did gather. One foot in front of the other, head held high, shoulders back. Like they belonged, like they knew what they were doing. They missed the pair of suspicious eyes that followed them. They spent the rest of the tour trying to pay attention, taking notes and making sketches to help them recall later. Or maybe for Tim, for Robin, for anyone? The haze seemed to last until they managed to make their way back to their little motel, nearly collapsing on the bed with an aggravated huff before rolling over and shoving a protein bar in their mouth. Maybe eating would help? Maybe a nap? Or maybe some good old meditation, especially now that the mission was done and they could rest. Maybe later they would see about patrolling, see if getting back out to the night sky helped shake whatever today has been. For now, they focused on eating, chugging a water bottle and laying down so their mind could drift. Tim slowly let the world come back into focus. He had been feeling fuzzy all day, like he was drifting away on a boat. There, yet not. He focused on the scratchy sheets under him, feeling how each fiber seemed to grip and grab at every skin cell it passed, how it itched and scraped, pricking along his skin. Okay, maybe he shouldn't focus on that. He shifted his focus to the smell of the room around him, stale and musky. He really needed to finish up here so he could leave. This couldn't be good for his health. Speaking of which, as he pulled in a deep breath, he felt his lungs spasming before coughing, forcing him back into more awareness. He opened his eyes and winced as the room tilted on its axis, swaying with waves before slowly evening out. He slowly tried to push himself up, but every joint in his body screamed out in pain. "Just great," he grumbled, frowning at the scratchiness in his throat. He pulled the blankets up over himself, shivering slightly as he tried to focus on when he managed to get sick. Not that it was a surprise. His immune system was shot after an impromptu surgery and a lost organ later, especially since he had not had his preemptive antibiotics to take since getting here. Since going to an alternate world, probably with alternate diseases. Shit, what if it was something that didn't exist back in Gotham? Would he even be able to return, or risk being a plague bearer? Would he go back just to see his friends and family succumb? Spreading something without an origin and without a vaccine? No. More likely it was the common cold or flu. He would have to keep an eye on it and monitor his own health. Right now, he couldn't afford to be out for the count. Not when he was finally getting somewhere. To distract himself, he pulled out the notebook and started flipping through the information. It wasn't as clear or concise as it normally was, but if he was getting sick, he supposed that made sense. Once reading over everything, he pulled up his phone and went to power it back on. Maybe he could work on some of the coding tonight, something to make himself feel more useful. Instead, his phone flickered to life, showing a symbol he was not familiar with, before flashing red and powering back down. Shit. Shit, that wasn't good. As the claws of desperation sunk their way into him, he tried to power it back on, with no luck. He tried plugging it in, hoping the battery died, but nothing changed. Well, there goes that plan. He pressed his face into the scratchy sheets, biting back the tears that threatened to push forth. It's fine. What was one more setback? He hadn't even located Jason yet, so what did it matter that he failed yet again? That he couldn't even do something as simple as figuring out what to do? That he couldn't even bother to think that this was a possibility? He needed to get up and move, even as his body screamed at him, and his body trembled with what was most likely the beginnings of a fever. He should get medicine, electrolytes, maybe some cough drops? Anything to force himself to be better, to perform better. Then he could focus on finding Jason, assuming he even had the right dimension and was not trapped here for nothing. He should go out tonight, because if Jason was here for so long, he was probably already dressed up in gear and fighting evil. He also desperately needed more clothes, and medicine, and probably a first aid kit. With a groan, Tim forced himself up, shivering as the blanket spilled off of him. He glanced down at his bandaged hands, and frowned. He should probably change the bandages, too. Clean out whatever wounds were there, and pray they weren't infected. He couldn't handle being sick on top of an infection. Or maybe it was all just infection. That wasn't good if it was. A later Tim problem. For now, he pushed himself up and drug himself into the shower. The water only got lukewarm and sputtered occasionally, but it would still work to wash the germs off. Once done in the shower, he pulled on his least dirty clothes and focused on doing some small stretches and a few yoga poses, anything to help with the ache and stiffness that had yet to leave. While he did that, he made a mental list of everything he needed, especially now that his phone was out of commission, and with it, all his programs, his documents. God, his photos, his memories, his family, his everything. Gone. He would no longer have access to the photos of him, Bart, Con, and Cassie that flooded his camera roll. No more hundreds of photos that Bart would take on his phone when Tim dared to leave. No photos of them before death and destruction forced their smiles away. None of his documents about trying to desperately bring back Con again and again. Any notes on his multidimensional travel? Gone. The readings and data collected? Gone. Everything he ever held dear? Gone. It made him want to scream, but he couldn't force up the energy. Not like anyone would complain, not in this part of town. So instead, he set himself to work and headed out, only bringing his bag and some cash with him. Not like his phone was useful anymore, and he did not want to risk his last piece of home being destroyed. Tim forced himself out, even as the world throbbed around him. pulling with the beat of his heart as his vision swam. Go back to bed, honey. You need the rest and fluids. No, Mom, I'm fine, Tim grumbled before shaking his head. Since when was the voice in his head Mom? Sure, his mom cared about him, helped take care of him, but she was also long dead. Maybe the fever was progressing faster than he thought. Oh, love, it's okay. Let me take care of you. No, he couldn't. He had a mission, and now a time crunch. No, Mama. Tim stumbled a bit as his foot caught on the edge of the cement, wincing as a loud group of people walked past, their voices grating over his already throbbing and distant brain. Go away, he finally grumbled, pushing his hands over his ears. Distantly, he knew he looked crazy, and maybe he was. He felt it, at least, and believe him, he wanted to curl up in bed and sleep the next 2 days away. But he needed medicine, needed electrolytes, needed food? What else did he need? He knew his list was longer, but his brain wasn't cooperating right now, like a film covering it, blocking it. One foot in front of the other, he forced his way down the street until he came across a pharmacy where he could at least buy the essentials, what his mind could focus on. He grabbed what little he could afford with the cash he grabbed. After all, he couldn't waste what little he had, and having a roof above his head was more important than some liquid IVs and Pedialytes. He had only just checked out when something came crashing through the side of the building, glass and plaster showering the floor. He didn't see what it was, just a vague shape made out of plaster dust, and a weird blade that dozed blood. Didn't have time to focus on it before he was down, falling until he could imagine himself crashing into his bed, in his nest, falling into the layers of blankets and stuffies his friends had gotten for him over the years. A way to keep him company when he was far away from them. He could almost relax, like maybe this was all one bad dream and not a fever-induced haze. Maybe just this once he could let himself relax, let his eyes fall closed, and let someone else handle things. And that is the end of chapter 7. Author's notes. Up next week, we'll have some new stars added to the mix. Hopefully some adults that can help him get medical attention and some actual decent food. Also, please don't be like Tim. Please take care of yourself and get some rest and water. For those who read Stray Little Bat, I officially started posting the little cut bits, and will post them on a weekly basis. They are part 2 of the series now. The first bit is mostly Clint-focused, set after he meets Jason. Reader's notes for me. I feel like I was also kind of dissociating with Tim this chapter while reading it, so sorry if my voice was like too monotone at certain bits. Yeah. Also, I feel like I was stuttering more. Well, not stuttering, but like slurring my words more today. My bad. Anyways, I believe it's next chapter. Y'all are gonna have to hear my Carrie voice in full and not just 1 or 2 sentences. So that's gonna be a journey. That's gonna be something. And we're gonna enjoy it. We're gonna have fun with that. Other than that, thank you guys for listening, and bye!